Welcome everyone to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle sponsored every Saturday by Still and Moving Center. And in it, we take up themes from our Still and Moving Center Almanac, which looks like this, and which has a theme for every week of this year. And this year is dedicated to citizens of the future. So we are, as citizens of the future, I think, seeing how we can contribute to the building of that future of which we are already citizens. And today we have a young citizen, I would say, at least in a young body, who's going to give us a presentation on our theme for this week, which is mental posture. And she is someone who teaches a practice which most people think of having to do with physical postures. She has been teaching yoga for the last 4 years and doing yoga for the last 10. She also graduated from the University of Southern Carolina. Her major, and I think you will recognize as I did, was self-crafted, religious studies through photo-visual anthropology, with a concentration in the Eastern traditions of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism. And she's traveled extensively to places including Italy, Israel, Costa Rica, Ireland, Spain, and Morocco, where she was in a studies abroad program studying human rights. To me, having spent a good part of this last year being able to spend time with Anna at the Still and Moving Center satsangs on Sunday, she represents somebody who really can speak credibly about this topic of mental posture, because I watch her always using the laboratory of her own mind to always be examining the human mind and how does it work, and what can we do with this human mind of ours, and to what purpose. So I give you Anna Morales for a conversation starter on mental posture. Anna?
Thank you, Renee, for that introduction. I'm excited to be here at Gems of the Wisdom Traditions. I've heard great things about this group. I think I've been with you guys one time before, but I'm usually an attendee of satsang, which I started attending with Renee about half a year ago, a little more than that, which is just one of my favorite parts of the week. So really grateful to be here and learn from this community. I'm excited to talk on mental posture today. As Renee mentioned, I have been, practicing mental posture on my own through my yoga practice and yoga teachings as well. But I definitely claim to be no expert in this topic. I think I'm always learning. So I definitely would love if you guys have any discussion topics or questions or suggestions throughout the presentation. Totally speak up, because I love talking with you all, not just lecturing. So with that being said, we'll talk on mental posture, at least my own interpretation of what I think Renee was maybe getting at for this topic for this week. And we're also going to be looking at this through the frame of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which Patanjali is a sage of India, so he has collected so much knowledge, or more so, I guess he was one of the first people to collect what was already being practiced in India and start to put it into a text for people to easily digest. But he does preface in the beginning of his sutras that there is an issue of translation, and their yoga is not necessarily something that can be understood through just text. It's experiential, of course. But I do think it is a great tool to look through his Yoga Sutras and decipher what he may be trying to say. So this is one passage from the beginning of his sutras, Sutra 2.32. It says Yoga Siti Vritti Nirodha, which is, or Chitti Vritti Nirodha in Sanskrit, which roughly translates to yoga is the restraint of mental activities. So that is one way to interpret it. It's been interpreted a couple other ways as well, but in the context of this conversation, I want you to think about yoga as concentration. This word yoga and concentration are alike somehow. And I want you to think of mental activities as the thinking mind and what we call in yoga the monkey mind. So we'll get a little bit more into that throughout the presentation. But one quote that Patanjali, he wrote down, let me see if I can find it super quick in his sutras, because I think I wrote about it in my presentation here. Patanjali says, what is to be learned is to use the will, which is also a distinct power from the mind and brain, in such a way that instead of permitting the mind to turn from one subject to another, just as they may move it, we shall apply a servant at any time and for as long a period as we wish to the consideration of whatever we have decided upon. So you can kind of see my notes below that, but in my own mind, when I was reading this quote, I was thinking about how, first of all, how Patanjali uses this term free will around this idea of mental posture and concentration. So I'm kind of curious to hear about your guys' thoughts with what abilities or what type of free will we might have with our mental thoughts, with our mental concentrations and distractions. But I also was thinking about how this is kind of a cool way. I think what he's trying to get at here, or the interpreter is trying to get at here, is that instead of having the mind use us, it says we shall apply a servant at any time. So maybe we can even have our minds be a servant or a tool for our own lives and our own actions. So when we're able to use our free will to use our mind, we can stop our mind from using us and begin to use our minds as a constructive tool. I think a really important part of yoga that would be cool to go over. I'm sure maybe you guys have heard of a few of these before, but I wanted to go over the 8 limbs of yoga. So first one is yama, which is our external moral disciplines. So understanding the world around us, outside of our bodies, and how we're interconnected with living things and with what's around us, how what we do affects everything in the world. Niyamas are working inside. So those are internal moral disciplines. One of those is santosha, meaning contentment. The yoga school that I studied under, it was called santosha, so that's how I remember it. As well as cleanliness of the mind, honesty, being fair and just pono. And then we have asana, which is what Renee mentioned. Many of us tend to think of when we practice here or around yoga. Western culture has definitely put an emphasis on the physical posture, but asana doesn't mean posture, and that's one of the 8 limbs in yoga. Pranayama is breath control and technique. So prana is our vital force energy through our breath, and yama means to control, or means technique or practice. So there's a few different practices that we can use with our breath to maybe aim towards yoga or concentration, as Patanjali phrases it. Then we have our 5th limb, pratyahara, which is something I was telling Renee, I have always kind of struggled with this concept of withdrawal of the senses, because for me, I'm someone who's very much in my own body, where it's hard for me to imagine me living in this world without having those senses of touch, smell, taste. But I think something that she mentioned, and something that helps me to understand and grasp this a little bit more, is not necessarily withdrawal or losing your senses, but rather not letting your senses control the operations of your mind, and not letting your senses create a monkey sort of mind where you are not able to direct and have a single point of concentration. limb number 6 and 7, I think, is where we start to really get into this topic of mental posture. So dharana is single pointed concentration. That, I think, is what Patanjali is sort of starting to get at in this term of mental posture and yoga and concentration. So that's when we're able to really slow down and point our mind in one direction, just being present. And then dhyana, which is, I think, almost a step further from dharana in a way, where you're able to absorb this practice of meditation and of single pointed concentration throughout your daily life. So it's not just a sit down, let me meditate here with my legs crossed for 15 minutes and then I'll stop. It's more so a lifestyle of meditation, at least from what I understand. And then we have our final limb, samadhi, which is bliss or enlightenment. It's kind of, I wouldn't say equivalent to, but in different traditions like nirvana or heaven. So those are our 8 limbs of yoga that we can kind of view this practice from. So for me, I was introduced to Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now during my yoga teacher training about 4 years ago. And the way that this author, Eckhart, kind of took this ancient concept of Patanjali's and ancient Indian single-pointed concentration, and he kind of reframed it in a more modern Western, I guess, frame or lens, is the thinking mind versus the knowing mind. And this is something that I've been trying to focus on myself and practice and bring into my teachings as well. And that's the thinking mind is that monkey mind. So that's the uncontrollable thoughts that come and control the way that you're feeling and how you're operating day to day. It's also, I think, in relation to being subconscious or unconscious in the world through our actions and thoughts. It's involuntary thought, so it's not something that you can bring in with control or let go. It's our identification with our thoughts and our emotions. So it's if something happens to us or if we're feeling a certain way, it takes up our presence and our being in that time. And it's a resistance to the present moment. And so a counter to that would be our knowing mind, which goes a little bit deeper than our thinking mind. That's where all of our true intellect comes from, is that knowing that goes beyond the mind. And that's associated with concentration, that single pointed concentration. It's also in yoga associated with this third eye right here. It's an area known to be associated with intuition and oneness as well. So yoga has also been translated to mean union, and that means to yoke, or it means to yoke, which means union between body, mind, spirit, body, mind, breath. So for me, when I'm able to think about thinking, I'm able to put it in this kind of framework to help me identify, am I thinking right now, or am I just being right now and letting true knowledge come through me? So these are a few different tools that can be used to help practice move towards yoga or concentration. And they kind of are similar, or definitely in line with those 8 limbs of yoga that we talked about a couple slides before. So the first one is pranayama. We have so many different breathing techniques. These are just a couple of them. Box breathing incorporates all 4 aspects of the breath. So we have our inhale. We have the top of our inhale, which is called suspension. We have our exhale, and then we have the bottom of our exhale, which is called retention. So if we imagine our breath is like a box with equal parts, we can inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, and then hold for 4. It's also similar to samavriti, which is equal breath. So inhaling for 4, exhaling for 4. There's so many different techniques, pranayama, that we can practice. Those are just a couple. And another form of practice is asana. So that's again, those physical postures. Raja yoga is translated roughly, Raja means royal, so it has to do with royalty and moving towards almost like a god within you. So, I mean, it can be interpreted in so many different ways, but we'll come back to that form of yoga. There's many different asanas or postures that can help aid towards Raja yoga. And asanas can be a moving meditation. So as you move, you can synchronize your body with your breath, which in Sanskrit is vinyasa. And more, I think beyond that, for me, you're able to sit in a seat of discomfort when you move. And for me, that's kind of like a physical type of posture, being able to sit and coming back to that idea of withdrawal of the senses. We're not necessarily letting go of a sense of discomfort, but we're sitting with it and we're not letting that control our mind, right? So coming back to that fifth limb in yoga, just sitting and breathing through the physical posture. Another tool is our mantras, which are short repetitions. Some examples of ones that can help you in meditation. I am light. I am one. I am here and now. And I am love. So maybe just inhaling, I am light. Exhaling, I am here and now. So if you want to think about one in your mind that you might want to try later after our call today, feel free. And then there's also mala beads, which you may have seen before. They are a string of beads you can hold in your hand, and they're a tool to help with concentration during a meditation. So every time you inhale, every time you exhale, you move your hand over one of those beads until you get to the full circle. And you can kind of see what that might look like right here. Also, you'll see the note below, activities that make you lose sense of space and time. So when is the last time that you felt like there's nothing to do after where you are, and there was nothing that necessarily came before, or you lost track doing something for an hour when you thought it was only 5 minutes? Maybe it's running for you, maybe it's knitting or some form of art, maybe it's Nia. Those are activities that can help you because then you're in your single pointed concentration. Also, anything that helps you to move inward. So we'll move forward and digest that. I wanted to come back to this quote that Renee included for introducing today's topic. And so this is from the Aquarian Therapy text, which I have not read. One must experience the thrill of giving so much that it is impossible to expect anyone else to give anything like the same in return. The outpouring of love and joy cannot be manifest on the external plane, for when it is real, it is as constant as breathing. Such is the inaudible hum, the unspoken mantra of the indestructible heart. A person who constantly cherishes this with true humility can effortlessly adopt the mental posture of an ostentatious prostration. One of the most beautiful postures that the human body can ever assume is bending low and prostrating on the floor. It is also extremely relaxing and regenerative in the teaching of Raja Yoga. A person who can assume this as a mental posture in relation to the vast ideal that is relevant to the whole of humanity can begin to perfect mental devotion to what is at the heart of the human heritage. Again, from the Aquarian Therapy. So I really love this text because in the very beginning, I think it introduces a way towards mental posture or oneness or this type of concentration that is approachable without necessarily an identification with a religion or a certain tradition type of practice, because it's based in love and in gratitude and in joy. So I think when you can get to the point where love and joy and giving is just second nature to you, as much as it is like breathing in and breathing out, that's an awesome practice. And I think it's definitely something that moves inwards, but then also beyond you and outside of you. But then it also introduces some ideas of maybe asanas, ways that you can, through the yogic tradition or lens, practice this inward movement of devotion and humility, which I think is really beautiful. So you can think of this posture kind of bending low, almost like you're in a bow. If you've ever been in a yoga class, maybe you've done child's pose before, where you can kind of let your knees bend on the floor, let your chest rest down, your forehead rest down, either on some type of structure, a block, maybe the floor, and you're kind of just resting here. It's very restorative on the body, and definitely humble too. So thank you, Renee, for including that quote. So this is just a quick reminder to find that concentration by observing or by just being through one of those tools. So the pranayama, the asana, the mantra, having mala beads maybe, or finding an activity that makes you lose your sense of time. So think about what that is for you right now. And I'd love to hear some examples at the end. So I think after working through this question myself, working through this topic, I came to the question of what is mental posture to you? And for me, I think I discovered that it means practicing a concentrated, observant, and knowing mind throughout daily and uncontrolled circumstances. So regardless of that environment. And it's a practice of mental endurance. So I think it is more so about that. I think it was the 6th limb of yoga, dhyana, moving between dhyana, dharana to dhyana. So absorbing the focus, meeting dhyana. So taking it into a daily practice, and wherever I am, no matter what the circumstances, having endurance in my mind and sitting upright, but almost in my mind, if you can imagine, no matter what comes in and out and around me. So yeah, that's all I have. If anyone has questions, please let me know. And if Renee, maybe I can put my contact information in the chat too. But thank you guys.
Wow, Anna, thank you so much. Wow, wonderfully presented. Very clear. I think you were in a certain mental posture as you formulated that entire presentation for us, so that it could more easily transmit from your being to ours. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I was wondering about the advantages of physical posture. We talk about having good posture. And whatever those advantages are, and you as a yoga teacher might have some ideas about the benefits of good physical posture, how those might also apply to mental posture.
I think that almost like I was saying before, when you have a physical posture and you're able to sit through discomfort, because even small things that we're not used to, like sitting upright and engaging your core, if we're just sitting down and meditating, a lot of people are super uncomfortable in that position. And it's not about trying to be uncomfortable, I guess, or have pain at all. You don't want to have pain, but I guess it's a practice of recognizing that one thing that is constant is that the things around us are constantly changing. So when we're able to practice in a very small and safe way day to day, just sitting in maybe something that feels new or not like something that we've been in before, that's when we can kind of practice that mental endurance of sitting there and just being, and knowing from beyond the thinking mind that you can be here. That is definitely a meditative strength, and I think it helps towards mental endurance, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. And would you say one of the telling signs of right posture is alignment? And if that is the case, does that ability to find right alignment help us actually, in no matter what position we might find ourselves in physically, we know how to somehow still keep aligned, our body aligned, as opposed to being all crooked, which it doesn't help us to keep balance, for example. And
Yeah, absolutely. I think for alignment, absolutely, we're our strongest selves when our joints are aligned, at least physically, so that's why we have to have that alignment, so that we're not hurting our joints when we move. So of course we would think to align our joints so that we're set up to have that strong foundation. There's also a bunch of other indicators, I think, of having a strong posture, and in the sutras, Patanjali says that an asana should be strong and steady. So it should be something that you can kind of sit and hold, even if you're really engaging a muscle for a long time. And that's when you start to use maybe your breath or a mantra to keep yourself centered during something that might not be totally comfortable. Another thing that is a big indicator is your breath. So when your breath starts to become unstill or unsteady, that the breath is the priority throughout the physical posture. So you need to come back to a place where you can maintain that breath, that prana, moving through you with steadiness and with ease. Sturga and Dukam, I think, is how you say it in Sanskrit. So there's a few different indicators there, but yes, definitely I'd say alignment is one of them.
Yeah, thank you so much. Carolyn, I see your hand up, and then Diana's.
Some of us had a teacher of philosophical and spiritual truths that when we went off to a conference with lots of people that we didn't necessarily know, it was always someone who said, well, we're going to do a Tuesday morning at 9:00. We're going to do a group meditation. And she strongly counseled against group meditation. Now, you saw your last slide, you had a half dozen people there, and they all looked well self-contained. But she thought very much that group meditation was not a good idea, particularly among amateurs, because that could lead to a lot of exchange on the psychic level that would kind of mess up everybody's psychic nature and not actually be an effective way to gain concentration or something at least resembling meditation. What is your experience? Because it is kind of popular in certain times and places. Oh yeah, let's all sit down in a big circle and we're all going to meditate together. Whereas you can see an argument for no, meditation's a private activity that you should do in your own orbit. Do you have a view on that, or do you have experience where with group meditation, and whether it's effective or even a little bit disturbing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've thought a lot about the differences between having an individual practice and a class practice, because a lot of the places that I've been hired to teach yoga have encouraged larger class settings and generalized practices for many individual bodies. So I think that the smaller a practice, not as the smaller the practice, but a smaller community almost with maybe just one teacher to one student, the smaller it is, the more effective, because it really should be a practice of understanding what you do for a living, how you move your body on a day-to-day basis, what you ate for breakfast that morning, that helps to inform what your practice is going to look like that day. And you can't really have that when you have a bigger community, right? And it's often not really like you can understand a person like they're your patient. That's how it was practiced a lot of the times in ancient India. And so I was actually telling Renée, I studied, it was a couple years ago, so I have lost some knowledge, but I studied one of my courses in college was understanding how yoga has been translated from its ancient Indian context through modernity and into Western culture as it has been. So a lot has changed. And you're right that now I think it's become definitely more of a trend, I guess, to have those larger class settings, whether that's like an asana physical practice, it's breath practice, or meditation. I haven't learned a lot about like psychic translations or like boundaries of the mind between different people, so I couldn't speak on that, I don't think. But I think that it can hurt or it can help a practice. So naturally, meditation, yoga is an inward practice. It's within each own body. So I think that having a group setting can challenge people because you have to make it into something where you're not letting the ego get in the way of, or your ego get in the way of your practice. And it shouldn't be about having or worrying about what you look like to other people or what you sound like to other people. Or if you don't look exactly the same way as a teacher or feel the same way, feel really good during your yoga practice. It's not always a feeling of really good because you're sitting through discomfort. But I guess it's a long-winded way to say that it can go either way, but it is an internal practice. So as long as that community that you're practicing with, it can be a tool towards your practice and encouragement rather than distraction, I think it can be constructive.
Thank you.
Did that make sense?
Yeah. I guess as I see it, we're just beginning. Perhaps in this century, there'll be quite a bit of change. We're just beginning to learn to practice this yoga. So it's important that we do it in ways and in contexts that are that we can learn from and cope with. I mean, you could do yoga while you're riding on the subway train, but maybe when you're a beginner, that's not too helpful. And we just don't know, it seems to me, that's my viewpoint, what's really happening when we're other people. It's like going to a party. Is that a helpful activity, or are you going to come away feeling kind of wasted and all mixed up with what other people said and not really understand all the psychological transfers that have been happening? So I guess we have a lot to learn to answer the question. But we be cautious about, and if we find ourselves in a situation of suddenly there's a kind of group concentration or apparent yoga and we find uncomfortable, we should just get up and leave, it seems to me.
I wonder if it's possible also, I mean, there are two things that I think you might be referring to, Carolyn. One is a guided meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are going through a guided meditation, it seems to me very important that you are being led by a very trustworthy guide. There's, in some ways nothing more precious than our minds. And we wouldn't want those to be guided off track, especially when Patanjali is talking about the importance of us being able to direct and focus our minds. And then there's also a practice of just everybody sitting together and silently meditating with one another. And it probably depends in that case also on what is the intent and how well is it cultivated. There are people who have dedicated, I think maybe in connection with the Dalai Lama, like an hour or a day to meditation on peace for the world. And it seems as though something like that could be very powerful and proper, and wouldn't have that same tendency to have this kind of psychic mess, between people. But those are just a few other reflections.
Those are very helpful.
Diana might have some actual insight to give us.
I've had some practice in this. First of all, Anna, you are amazing. You touched my heart with your deep knowledge and wisdom and how you shared it. And I just really want to thank you. It was very special. So thank you. I have done group meditations, led them and been in them with Zazen meditation for the last 50 years. And my experience is Jesus said where 2 or 3 are gathered. And when you have a group meditation, you are doing it with the intent of everyone is in their own breath work. You're not watching from someone else. And there's something around that idea and the cauldron of doing it. We're in the world. We have psychic things all over the world. And when we can do it within a group, the power is just so encouraging and strong. It's just an amazing experience. And I do my daily meditation by myself, but I think there is something very powerful for me about working with the meditation. And you're right, Carolyn, if it doesn't feel good, don't stay. And I think you're right, Renee, too. There's something around guided imagery. I've led lots of those in groups too. So it's like it depends upon where the intention and how the group is set up. The other thing I want to, that you struck with me, Anna, you got me thinking, the difference between seated meditation and living meditation. And it's how do we take our seated meditation into our living meditation? And there's 4 areas that lately I've been really working with of what that means to be present. And the first one is beginner's heart mind. How do we live in this world with a curiosity, a wonder, an awe, a gratitude of beginner's heart mind? To me, that's an important component of living the mental posture. Another one is only don't know. I'm finding that I don't know what's true most of the time. And if I can live in that only don't know, then I can be open to receiving divine wisdom and divine guidance instead of having a set way of seeing things. The third one is Eckhart Tolle, live this only moment, or living in the present moment. And, I work with that a lot. I think that's something I talk about, but how do I not live in the past or in the future, but live in the only don't know? And for me, that's really deep listening to divine wisdom and divine guidance and helping me stay in this present moment and surrendering or trusting with faith what's going to happen. And the fourth part for me that I've been really practicing for this living meditation is love and compassion for myself and others. That when I live those 4 ways, I feel like I'm living my meditation. And I practice those in sitting by myself or with a group. And then I bring it into my daily life because it's only in our daily life that we can be in the world, but not of it. And for me, that's the mental posture that I work with in living my meditation. So thank you, Anna, for getting me to think about it and for your rich wisdom and knowledge. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Diana. I love how you worded those different techniques towards living in the present moment. The first one that you mentioned, it reminded me of something that I had tried to practice before, and it was pretending like you're an alien living in your body. So it's like you just came into this earth and you are learning about everything for the first time, and even stuff like water or how things feel or how things smell. are totally new to you. So it can definitely, I think, spark a type of curiosity that makes everything bring you into a present moment. And that's where I get confused with the withdrawal of the senses, because I'm like, I think that a lot of times it's an aid for me. So that's definitely a challenge for me. But that's awesome. It sounded like humility for you is a big practice, and then listening, loving, compassion as well. So thank you so much. That's going to help me to think about a living meditation for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna and Diana and everyone. I was thinking a word that's gotten pretty common these days is this idea of agency. And I think that this practice, and thank you for trying to describe maybe a 6,000-year-old practice into 20 minutes. It's a daunting task, and thank you so much for what you've opened for us. But this idea that, you know, the 8 limbs are almost like a stair steps or a ladder moving up to this state where we have been able to take control and of the monkey mind without and I love what Diana said about being in the world but not of it, that, you know, we recognize that we do live in the past and in the future, but recognizing that it is the past and the future helps us to stay in the present. And that's the idea of agency, that we have choice in what we put our mind towards. And I think that is the essence of what Patanjali and yoga is about, is to develop that agency so that we can be human and make good choices as opposed to perhaps being guided by lower realms or lower aspects of the mind, fear, for example. And so I was thinking that also this idea of that as we develop through this practice, then we can be at a party full of obnoxious people with odd ideas and political views. And because of the posture that we've developed through our practice, be able to sustain the knowing mind and not be yanked aside. But it is practice, and yeah, thank you everyone for bringing this topic to life. It is definitely a passionate topic for me.
Yeah, thank you so much, David, who is currently really engaged in studying the mind and is getting his master's in psychology, I believe, correct?
Following Diana's footsteps, marriage and family track now, and I'm actually at the park waiting for my little kitty cat to come out of hiding, because I'm doing a rescue, and I'll be taking him home today. But he's napping right now, so I'm in my car waiting for it to cool off.
Understanding the cat mind as well. Thank you.
Yes.
Robert?
Yeah, and I wondered if the yamas and niyamas are what Diana was talking about, a part of the living meditation.
Absolutely, yeah. I think kind of bringing, like what I was saying, that meditation can't just be a sit down and be in your own mind, and then the timer goes off and then you're back to your thinking and your monkey mind. I think the challenge of it, which is why, David, I love how you said that sometimes if you go to a party and it's like a big hard atmosphere for you to be in, but then you can come back to that inward mind and inward concentration and single pointed concentration, and know that you have that knowing from somewhere beyond just what's going on with your mind and maybe what people have been surrounded by it and believing now because of different environments. But anyways, I think that absolutely the whole practice of it is bringing it to life. And I guess that the yamas, the external practices and moral disciplines, can be a great way to do that.
Yeah, because it seems hard to be truthful all the time and harmless and not possessive and have control over one's passion.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Cliff and then Sarah.
Well, yeah, I'd like to echo what Diana said, and it was a beautiful presentation you gave. A couple of things that struck me was right off the bat, you said that it's the will that controls and helps to concentrate the mind. I think that's what Patanjali was saying. And then a phrase that you used in your very last slide that really caught my attention was this, I think it was uncontrolled circumstances. The idea of taking your mental posture into uncontrolled circumstances. And I was curious what you meant by that, but I was thinking that, there's this debate about whether human beings have free will. But if we truly practice mental posture, say quietly individually, but then we go out in the world where there's a lot of uncontrolled circumstances, it seems if we have the right mental posture, of using will properly, we would have a lot more options as to how we choose to conduct ourselves, say in various circumstances, some difficult, but we could be a much more creative human being in our daily lives and have free will by doing this practice.
Absolutely. I think that even more so than having different options, you have more clarity to what may truly be right for you and for the people around you and for the world around you when you're able to have that still and centered mindfulness, so one-pointed concentration. So I agree. And that question of free will, that's also something that I was really curious about, because I've only been in my own mind, in my own body in this lifetime, at least from what I know. So I can only think about my free will, but I can't imagine. I know some people have been through different challenges and different circumstances. And when you have that controlled environment, you have a comfortable space to practice and be a little bit more open and vulnerable and concentrated. But when you go out into that party and you go out into the real world and you have to put it to practice, it's definitely harder or more of a challenge to be able to have that clarity and stillness. So I was curious to see if anyone else had any thoughts on that idea of free will there, and maybe ways where they didn't feel like they did have free will.
Let's see. I wonder if we should open it up for that question and then turn to Sarah. And I'm going to ask Sarah, is your question maybe helping to answer that? Or should we look at her question first and then go to you?
Yeah, I think it might connect in some sense. I was just going to come back to Anna's question about what is mental posture to you. And I think for me, because I am a Feldenkrais practitioner and I work with the nervous system, I often think of dynamic equilibrium, both in balance and movement, but also mentally in our thinking. So I think mental posture is kind of dynamic equilibrium around a sense of self, so that we can have an open mind and be receptive, but we are also anchored in our own values and our own purpose. Because if you're too receptive, then any idea, any suggestion could just throw you off. So I think that could relate to the free will, that we can be open and we can have conversations with people that are different than ourselves, or be, another practice might be suggested and we can try it on, but we still are able to filter it through ourselves.
Awesome. I like that interpretation a lot, and I agree. And I think in the yogic tradition, or at least when I've learned about wheels of energy in our body, I've learned about manifesting and then grounding. So I think that there can be so many different ways to think about that and think about balance and yin and yang and so on. But I think that's a great way to think about mental posture for sure.
Yes, it seems to me that the comment that you made, Sarah, also applies to the question I was asking Anna at the beginning, like what are some of the attributes of physical posture that we could learn from for mental posture? And that idea of dynamic equilibrium is just really beautiful, because it doesn't mean that to have effective posture that we're walking around with a book on our heads, you know. that's not very responsive to the many needs of what might be called for, say, if we're taking care of a toddler and we're trying to keep this book balanced on our head. That's really not very effective. Whereas when you have this kind of integration of all the parts of the body, to go back to the body posture analogy, where you kind of have that proprioception of knowing where all those body parts are, and you can align them properly with one another so they balance one another, then you can be very, very dynamic, and still stay organized as a being in motion, not to kind of come undone by the different circumstances that we're trying to respond to. And for example, tripping and going splat on our faces, that is kind of analogous to what can happen to us if we don't have proper mental posture, and we do get out into those challenging circumstances in the world, and we're still trying to, you know, keep our little book balanced on the top of our heads. You know, I'm going to be sitting in my yogic thought. It doesn't give us that kind of dynamism that we need to be responsive to the moment. Yeah. That was a great phrase to use, I think, in this conversation, this dynamic equilibrium. And thank you to you for bringing that to us from the Feldenkrais field. And Sarah Binns is one of our newest Feldenkrais teachers at Still and Moving Center, and we're really pleased to have her with us today. Thank you for being here. Anna, you got another idea came to mind with this.
Yes, I also need to learn more about the Feldenkrais practice. That sounds like something that is really cool. And I think, Renee, how you said that reminded me, I think that endurance is the practice of maintaining that dynamic equilibrium and coming back and kind of shifting and wobbling in your balance, but then still coming back to a new type of equilibrium. And having that practice over and over and over again is what helps to maintain and build on that endurance. And for me, I think I mentioned this in satsang before, but that's the difference between balance and harmony. Sometimes we don't want balance, sometimes we want harmony. So it's kind of more like a soft way to work two things in collaboration, or two things in tandem with each other, rather than, you know, perfect equal balance. Even you think about the skyscrapers that are built to be able to like move 1 degree to the right and 1 degree to the left, because if they weren't having that dynamic structure, then they would just crumble when a certain wind or storm came, and without that controlled environment around them.
Yeah, thank you. Any last point that somebody would like to make before we close? I will let you know that we'll stay on for a little while for anybody who might like to follow up with different points that have been made, or ask your own new questions, but we will try to keep a little bit timely here. I'm going to ask if someone will just prepare themselves to give a vote of thanks to Anna after I tell you a little bit about what we have upcoming. Next week, we'll take up the topic of soul education, which I think is very much related to our topic for this week. And on April 29th, we'll take up the topic of the way of the Bodhisattva. And Bob Buss is going to speak about that from the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, of which he is a practitioner, and he's also been a religious studies professor. We have honoring wisdom keepers and children of Mother Earth coming up after that. And on May 27th, just to cast a little bit further into the future, I had a seat made on a long airplane flight, and we spent the entire flight in conversation. He's a fascinating person who has just devoted the last 2 decades to learning about the really unknown Hawaiian musical history and its tradition. And he has created the Pacific String Museum. His name is Kylan Reese. So that should be, we have a lot of good stuff coming up. So let me conclude by seeing, is there somebody who would like to give Anna a vote of thanks for her presentation and many contributions during today's session? What usually happens is all these people are holding back because they want to give it, but they want to give somebody else the opportunity. Carol Ann, are you popping on?
Thank you so much, Anna, for just such a wonderfully done presentation. And it was so easy to follow everybody with their thoughts as they related to the material that you presented. But thank you, thank you, thank you. So yes, much appreciated.
Thank you, Carolyn. Good to see you.
Yes, and thank you all so much for your attendance. We're so delighted to have you with us in thought and spirit. Some of you far away and some of you a little closer. It's really wonderful to have you. We'll stay on for anybody who'd like to stay on for a little longer. Aloha. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much, Anna.
Aloha.